The containment field sparked and died with a sound like someone stepping on a very large bug. Dr. Vera Kowalski watched the energy barrier flicker out of existence and sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that suggested this wasn't her first rodeo with malfunctioning alien technology. "Well," she said to the 12-foot-tall crystalline being standing beside her, "that's probably not good." Ambassador Urix's entire body structure seemed to vibrate with what might have been panic, though it was hard to tell with his species. The light refracting through his translucent form shifted from calm blue to alarmed yellow, faster than a traffic light having an identity crisis. "Dr. Kowalski, you assured us the demonstration would be contained to the simulation chamber," Urix said, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonic resonance that made him sound like a choir of very concerned wind chimes. "The safety protocols were specifically designed to prevent any actual damage to station infrastructure." Vera glanced at the smoking remains of what had been, until approximately 30 seconds ago, a perfectly functional holographic projector. The acrid smell of fried electronics filled the air, mixing with something that smelled suspiciously like burned ozone and disappointed expectations. "Look, technically speaking, the demonstration was contained," she replied, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "It's just that your definition of contained and my definition of contained might have some slight philosophical differences. The Galactic Council's premier diplomatic facility, Nexus Station, had been designed to handle first-contact scenarios with species possessing everything from acidic blood to electromagnetic pulse generation capabilities. What it apparently hadn't been designed for was a human being asked to demonstrate why her species qualified as an apex predator. The request had seemed reasonable enough at the time. The Galactic Council maintained strict protocols for admitting new species to their interstellar community. Each applicant species underwent comprehensive evaluation, including assessment of their natural capabilities, technological development, and potential threat level to existing member civilizations. Most species found the process straightforward. The Zephyrians demonstrated their ability to manipulate gravitational fields. The Karathi showed off their natural camouflage capabilities. The Vextai had simply stood very still and let their natural armor speak for itself. Humans, as it turned out, were significantly more complicated. The trouble had started during the preliminary interview when Councillor Keth, the lead evaluator whose insectoid features made him look like a praying mantis that had been hitting the gym, asked what seemed like a standard question. "Dr. Kowalski, our records indicate that your planet harbors numerous apex predators, large carnivorous mammals, reptiles, and various other species that occupy the top of their respective food chains. Which of these would you classify as the most dangerous to your species?" Vera had paused, considered the question for exactly 3 seconds, and then started laughing. Not polite diplomatic laughter, not nervous laughter, the kind of deep, genuine laughter that suggested someone had just told her the best joke she'd heard in years. "Oh, that's good," she had said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You want to know which of Earth's apex predators is most dangerous to humans?" "That is correct," Keth had replied, his compound eyes reflecting confusion in about 47 different directions. "You're looking at it." The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs. Somewhere in the background, a ventilation system hummed. A data pad beeped softly. Ambassador Urix's crystalline structure made a sound like wind through a cave system, which Vera was beginning to recognize as his species' equivalent of nervous throat clearing. "I'm sorry," Councillor Keth said finally. "Could you clarify that statement?" "Humans," Vera explained patiently, as if discussing the weather with a particularly slow child, "are Earth's apex predator. We're the most dangerous thing on our planet, by a considerable margin." Security Chief Dral, whose reptilian features had been maintaining a carefully neutral expression throughout the proceedings, suddenly leaned forward. Her scaled hands moved to what Vera assumed was some sort of communication device. "Dr. Kowalski," Dral said slowly, "our preliminary scans of your physiology indicate that humans lack natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no venom, no natural armor. Your species appears to be, well, rather fragile." "Fragile?" Vera's eyebrows shot up. "Have you actually read our file?" Of course we have, Archivist Nex interjected, his gaseous form shifting colors in what might have been indignation. We have a complete biological and sociological profile of your species compiled over several rotations of observation. Did you read the part about the ice ages? Natural climate fluctuations. Many species survive such events. Multiple extinction-level asteroid impacts? Again, survivable with proper adaptation. Supervolcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years at a time. Challenging but not unprecedented. Vera nodded thoughtfully. And humans survived all of that, while simultaneously hunting mammoths with pointy sticks and somehow managing to drive several dozen other species extinct just by existing in the same general area. The council members exchanged glances. At least Vera assumed they were exchanging glances. It was hard to tell with Nex, who didn't appear to have anything resembling eyes. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Weck spoke up, her aquatic features glistening under the chamber's lighting. Survival and apex predator status are not the same thing. Many species are resilient without being dominant predators. Right, Vera said, which brings us to the demonstration. That was when things had started to go sideways. The Council had prepared what they considered a comprehensive combat simulation, a virtual reality environment designed to test a species' natural fighting capabilities against various scenarios. Most species were evaluated against simulated prey animals or environmental hazards appropriate to their evolutionary background. The Zephyrians had faced flying predators in aerial combat scenarios. The Karathi had been tested against pack hunters in dense jungle environments. The Vextai had simply stood in place while the simulation threw increasingly dangerous obstacles at their armor plating. For humans, the Council had prepared what they considered an appropriately challenging scenario. A single large predator in an open environment, roughly equivalent to what they understood to be a major threat from Earth's ecosystem. The simulation had materialized around Vera in the form of a massive carnivorous creature that looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a small tank and given the result anger management issues. The beast was approximately 12 feet long, possessed fangs that could probably open cans, and moved with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered a prey animal it couldn't catch. Vera had taken one look at the simulated predator, picked up a virtual rock from the ground, and thrown it at the creature's head with the casual precision of someone who had clearly done this before. The rock connected with a satisfying thunk. The predator stumbled, shook its head, and charged. Vera picked up another rock. What followed was approximately 15 minutes of the most methodical, systematic dismantling of an apex predator that the Galactic Council had ever witnessed. Vera didn't fight the creature so much as she problem-solved it out of existence. She used rocks, sticks, the terrain itself, and what appeared to be an intuitive understanding of physics that let her turn every element of the environment into a potential weapon. When the simulated predator finally collapsed, Vera was standing over its body, holding a makeshift spear she had constructed from a tree branch and a sharp stone, looking about as winded as someone who had just finished a light jog. "Okay," she said, addressing the stunned council members. "Now, do you want to see what happens when I have actual tools?" That was when the containment field had failed. The simulation's safety protocols had been designed around the assumption that test subjects would engage in direct physical combat with the virtual environment. They had not been designed for someone who would systematically exploit every possible weakness in the system's programming while simultaneously stress testing the projector's ability to render increasingly complex tool usage. When Vera had started constructing what appeared to be a functional trebuchet out of simulated materials, the holographic projector had simply given up and died. "Dr. Kowalski," Ambassador Urich said now, his crystalline form still cycling through concerned colors, "I believe we may need to revise our evaluation protocols." "Probably a good idea," Vera agreed, poking at the smoking remains of the projector with her foot. "Though honestly, this is pretty much how most of our technology demonstrations go. You should see what happens when we try to show people our space program." Councillor Keth's compound eyes were fixed on her with what she was beginning to recognize as a mixture of fascination and horror. "Dr. Kowalski, When you say humans are your planet's apex predator, you're being quite literal, aren't you? Oh, absolutely. We didn't climb to the top of the food chain, Counselor. We dragged the food chain down to our level and beat it to death with rocks. Then we figured out how to make better rocks. Security Chief Draal was definitely reaching for her communication device now. I think, she said slowly, we're going to need to call an emergency session. Emergency session? Vera looked genuinely surprised. This is just the preliminary demonstration. Wait until you see our actual military capabilities. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Archivist Nex making what might have been a whimpering noise, though it was hard to tell with his gaseous physiology. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Weck said carefully, when Earth submitted their application for Galactic Council membership, they sent you as their representative. Are you their most dangerous individual? Vera blinked. Me? Oh no, I'm the diplomatic representative. I'm here because I'm considered relatively harmless and good with people. The dangerous ones stayed home. Ambassador Urix's color spectrum shifted to something that looked like ultraviolet panic. Relatively harmless? Well, I'm just a xenobiologist. I study alien life forms and figure out how they work. It's not like I'm military or anything. And your military personnel would be more dangerous, obviously. That's kind of the point of having a military. The council members were definitely exchanging looks now. Even Nex seemed to be paying attention, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested deep concentration or possibly existential dread. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Keth said finally, I think we're going to need to review your species file more carefully and possibly revise our threat assessment protocols. Sure thing, Vera said cheerfully, though you might want to fix your containment system first. I think I smell something burning. As if on cue, another piece of the simulation equipment sparked and went dark. That's definitely not supposed to happen, Ambassador Urix muttered, his harmonics shifting to what sounded like resigned acceptance. Don't worry, Vera assured him. It's mostly under control. The look that passed between the council members suggested they were beginning to understand that a human's definition of mostly under control might be somewhat different from everyone else's. The emergency session convened in what the Galactic Council optimistically called their Crisis Management Chamber, though after the morning's events, several members were beginning to question whether any chamber was truly adequate for managing a crisis involving humans. Dr. Vera Kowalski sat in the center of the circular room, surrounded by 12 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomatic minds, all of whom were currently staring at her with expressions ranging from scientific curiosity to barely contained terror. The chair they'd provided was clearly designed for beings considerably larger than humans, leaving her feet dangling slightly above the floor in a way that somehow made the entire situation feel even more surreal. Before we proceed, Councillor Keth announced, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's soft lighting in patterns that suggested deep unease. I want to establish some ground rules for this demonstration. Demonstration? Vera looked genuinely puzzled. I thought this was just a follow-up interview. Dr. Kowalski, Security Chief Draal interjected, her scaled fingers drumming against the surface of her datapad in a rhythm that sounded like nervous rainfall. After what happened to our simulation equipment, the Council has decided that we need a more comprehensive understanding of human capabilities. The previous assessment, Ambassador Urix added, his crystalline form shifting through a spectrum of colors that had moved well beyond concerned yellow into what could only be described as alarmed orange, raised certain questions about the accuracy of our initial evaluation. Vera nodded thoughtfully. Right. So you want me to demonstrate human apex predator behavior without breaking any more of your equipment? That would be preferable, yes. And you want to understand how humans became the dominant species on Earth despite lacking natural weapons, armor, or other obvious predatory adaptations. Correct. Okay, Vera said, settling back in her oversized chair with the casual confidence of someone about to explain why the sky was blue to a room full of people who had never seen a sky. But I'm going to need some props. What followed was 20 minutes of the most educational and terrifying show-and-tell session in Galactic Council history. Vera had requested a collection of basic materials, some metal rods, synthetic fabric, a few chemical compounds that the station's replicators could safely produce, and what she described as some rocks, but like really good rocks. The council had provided these items with the same cautious optimism of parents giving their child safety scissors for the first time. "The thing you have to understand about humans," Vera began, picking up one of the metal rods and examining it with the practiced eye of someone evaluating a potential tool, "is that we didn't evolve to be apex predators in the traditional sense. We evolved to be something much more dangerous." More dangerous than an apex predator? Archivist Nex's gaseous form swirled with what might have been skepticism. "That seems contradictory." "Not more dangerous," Vera corrected, beginning to wrap the synthetic fabric around one end of the metal rod in a pattern that was starting to look suspiciously purposeful. "Different dangerous. See, most apex predators are specialists. They're really good at one specific thing. Tigers are ambush hunters, sharks are aquatic pursuit predators, eagles are aerial specialists." She held up the now fabric-wrapped rod, which had somehow transformed into what was clearly a functional grip. "Humans are generalists. We're not the best at any one thing, but we're decent at everything. And more importantly, we're really good at making everything else better at things." Councillor Weck leaned forward, her aquatic features glistening with what might have been curiosity or possibly cold sweat. "You're referring to tool use. Many species employ tools." "Sure," Vera agreed, picking up several of the chemical compounds and examining their labels. "But most species use tools to do things they could already do, just more efficiently. Humans use tools to do things we absolutely cannot do otherwise." She began combining the chemicals with movements that were clearly practiced, creating what appeared to be some sort of adhesive compound. "For example, humans can't fly. But we looked at birds flying around and said, 'That looks useful, we should do that too,' so we invented flying machines. Many species have developed aircraft," Security Chief Drall pointed out, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect this conversation was heading somewhere she didn't want to go. "Right, but most species developed aircraft after they developed spaceflight," Vera replied, using the adhesive to attach one of the really good rocks to the end of her improvised handle. "Humans developed aircraft because we wanted to drop explosives on each other more efficiently." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested several highly intelligent beings were rapidly recalculating their assumptions about human civilization. "You developed flight technology," Councillor Keth said slowly. "For warfare?" "Oh, we developed most of our technology for warfare," Vera said cheerfully, testing the balance of what was now clearly a functional warhammer. "Flight, computers, the internet, space travel, nuclear power, GPS, duct tape. Pretty much everything useful started as a way to either kill people more effectively or avoid being killed more effectively." Ambassador Urix's crystalline structure had shifted to a color that didn't appear anywhere on the visible spectrum, which Vera was beginning to suspect was his species' equivalent of a nervous breakdown. "Dr. Kowalski, are you saying that human technological development is primarily driven by conflict?" "Not primarily," Vera corrected, giving the warhammer a few practice swings that made several council members lean back in their chairs. "But conflict is a really good motivator for innovation. Nothing makes you figure out how to do something better than someone else trying to kill you for doing it." She set the improvised weapon aside and picked up another metal rod, this one longer and thinner. "The thing is, humans didn't just develop tools for hunting or warfare. We developed tools for making better tools. And then we developed tools for making tools that make better tools." "Tool recursion," Archivist Nex observed, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was taking notes. "Several species have achieved limited tool recursion." "How limited?" Vera asked, beginning to fashion what appeared to be a spear point from one of the remaining rocks. "Most species achieve 2, perhaps 3 levels of tool recursion before reaching technological saturation. Humans are currently at about 15 levels and climbing," Vera said casually, testing the sharpness of her improvised blade against her thumb. We have machines that design machines, that build machines, that manufacture machines, that assemble machines, that create tools that we use to build better machines. The council members exchanged glances that were becoming increasingly frantic. But that's not the scary part, Vera continued, attaching the spear point to the metal rod with practiced efficiency. The scary part is that we did all of this while simultaneously trying to kill each other. I'm sorry, Security Chief Drall said faintly. Could you elaborate on that? Sure. So while humans were developing agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, engineering, medicine, and all the other foundations of civilization, we were also engaged in pretty much constant warfare with other humans. We built cities and then immediately started figuring out how to knock down other people's cities. We invented writing so we could keep better records of who we were fighting and why. Vera held up the completed spear, which looked disturbingly professional despite being constructed from basic materials in less than 30 minutes. We domesticated animals and then immediately started training them to help us fight. We developed mathematics partly so we could calculate artillery trajectories more accurately. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Weck interrupted, her voice carrying a note of what might have been desperation. Are you telling us that humans developed advanced civilization while engaged in active warfare with members of their own species? Oh, not just active warfare, Vera replied, setting the spear aside and beginning work on what appeared to be some sort of projectile device. Really, creative warfare. We didn't just fight with clubs and rocks. We invented new and interesting ways to fight on a regular basis. She paused in her construction to look around the room. I mean, we invented crossbows, which are basically mechanical murder devices. Then we invented gunpowder, which let us murder people from much farther away. Then we invented cannons, which let us murder people through walls. Then we invented aircraft, which let us murder people from the sky. Then we invented nuclear weapons, which let us murder entire cities at once. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Ambassador Urix making what could only be described as a crystalline, whimpering noise. And the really impressive part, Vera continued, apparently oblivious to the growing horror around her, is that we did all of this while also developing art, literature, philosophy, music, and really excellent food. We wrote poetry about warfare. We composed symphonies inspired by battles. We created paintings of famous military victories. She held up her latest creation, which appeared to be a functional sling constructed from fabric and metal components. We turned warfare into an art form, and then we turned that art form into entertainment, and then we turned that entertainment into a way to teach our children about strategy and tactics. Your children? Councillor Keth's voice had risen to a pitch that suggested his species' equivalent of panic. Oh, sure. Human children play war games from a very early age. It's considered educational. We have toys that are miniature weapons. We have games that simulate combat scenarios. We tell our children bedtime stories about famous battles and legendary warriors. Vera loaded a small stone into her improvised sling and gave it a few experimental swings. And that's just individual combat. Wait until you hear about our group tactics. Group tactics? Security Chief Drall asked weakly. Well, yeah. Humans are pack hunters, remember? We don't just fight as individuals. We coordinate, we plan. We develop strategies that involve hundreds or thousands of individuals working together to achieve specific objectives. She released the stone, which flew across the chamber with impressive accuracy to strike a designated target on the far wall. We invented formations, supply chains, communication networks, intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and economic warfare. We learned how to fight wars on multiple fronts simultaneously while maintaining complex diplomatic relationships with neutral parties. The projectile had embedded itself in the wall with enough force to crack the surface material, which was supposed to be nearly indestructible. Dr. Kowalski, Ambassador Urix said, his voice barely above a whisper, when you say humans are apex predators, you're not just talking about individual capabilities, are you? Individual capabilities? Vera laughed, the same genuine laugh that had started this whole situation. Oh no, individual humans are actually pretty fragile. We're not particularly fast, strong, or tough compared to most predators. Our real strength is that we're a collective apex predator. She gestured around the room with the casual confidence of someone making a point about the weather. One human with basic tools is dangerous. 2 humans with basic tools are exponentially more dangerous. 100 humans with basic tools can reshape continents. 1,000 humans with advanced tools can reshape planets. And how many humans, Councillor Keth asked with the tone of someone who really didn't want to know the answer, currently exist on Earth? About 8 billion, give or take. The silence that followed could have been heard on neighboring star systems. 8 billion, Archivist Nex repeated slowly, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was having trouble processing this information. 8 billion apex predators. 8 billion cooperative apex predators, Vera corrected, with approximately 15 levels of tool recursion and several thousand years of experience in creative problem-solving under pressure. She looked around the room at the assembled council members, all of whom appeared to be reconsidering fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligent life in the galaxy. "So," she said brightly, "any other questions about human capabilities?" The council chamber had taken on the atmosphere of a morgue where someone had accidentally invited the corpse to give a lecture. Dr. Vera Kowalski sat surrounded by her improvised arsenal, completely oblivious to the fact that 12 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats were currently experiencing what their respective species might charitably call an existential crisis. Archivist Nex was the first to break the stunned silence, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was accessing deep historical databases. "Dr. Kowalski, I believe we need to examine your species' historical records more thoroughly. Our preliminary assessment may have been incomplete." "Oh, you read our history?" Vera asked, genuinely interested. "That's great. Most species don't bother with the historical context. What did you think?" The swirling patterns in Nex's gaseous form shifted to what could only be described as deeply troubled. "We may have misinterpreted certain data points. When your records mention events like the 100 Years' War, we assumed this referred to a single conflict that lasted approximately 100 standard years." "That's correct," Vera confirmed. "But upon closer examination, it appears this was merely one of many such extended conflicts occurring simultaneously across different regions of your planet." "Also correct. We're pretty good at multitasking." Councillor Weck leaned forward, her aquatic features glistening with what was definitely nervous perspiration now. "Dr. Kowalski, our analysis indicates that humans have been engaged in organized warfare for approximately 6,000 years of recorded history. Is this accurate?" 6,000 years of recorded warfare, Vera agreed, "though we've probably been fighting each other for much longer than that. We just didn't write it down until we invented writing, which we partially invented to keep track of who we were fighting and why." Security Chief Dral's scaled fingers had stopped their nervous drumming and were now gripping her datapad with enough force to leave permanent impressions. "And during this 6,000-year period of continuous warfare, humans simultaneously developed agriculture, metallurgy, mathematics, engineering, medicine, and eventually spaceflight technology." "Well, we didn't develop them simultaneously," Vera clarified. "We developed them sequentially, with each advancement making us better at warfare, which created pressure to develop the next advancement, which made us better at warfare, and so on." She picked up one of her improvised weapons and examined it thoughtfully. "It's actually a pretty elegant feedback loop. Warfare drives technological innovation. Technological innovation enables more sophisticated warfare. More sophisticated warfare requires better technology to defend against it, and the cycle continues." Ambassador Urix had progressed through his entire visible spectrum and was now cycling through colors that probably didn't have names in any known language. "Dr. Kowalski, you're describing technological advancement driven by an arms race that lasted for millennia." "Multiple arms races, actually. We rarely had just one conflict going at a time. Humans are really good at parallel processing." Councillor Keth's compound eyes were fixed on her with the intensity of someone watching a natural disaster unfold in slow motion. "Can you give us specific examples of how warfare drove human technological development?" "Sure," Vera said, settling back in her oversized chair with the enthusiasm of someone about to discuss their favorite hobby. "Take metallurgy. We started working with copper and bronze primarily to make better weapons and tools for making weapons. Then we figured out iron, which made much better weapons. Then steel, which made even better weapons. She gestured to her improvised spear. But here's the interesting part. Once we had better metallurgy for weapons, we could use the same techniques to make better agricultural tools, which increased food production, which supported larger populations, which meant we could field larger armies, which required better weapons, which drove further metallurgical advancement. A positive feedback loop, Archivist Nex observed, his form swirling in patterns that suggested he was taking very detailed notes. Exactly. And it gets better. Better agriculture meant we could support specialists who didn't have to spend all their time growing food. So we got dedicated blacksmiths, engineers, tacticians, and eventually entire military-industrial complexes. Councillor Weck was making notes on her data pad with movements that looked increasingly frantic. And this pattern repeated across multiple technological domains? Oh, absolutely. Take mathematics. We developed geometry partly to calculate siege engine trajectories and fortification angles. We developed trigonometry for artillery calculations. We developed calculus partly to solve ballistics problems. Vera picked up her improvised sling and gave it a few casual swings. We developed chemistry to make better explosives and better armor. We developed physics to understand projectile motion and structural engineering. We developed medicine because warfare produces a lot of injured people, and injured soldiers who recover can fight again. Dr. Kowalski, Security Chief Droll interrupted, her voice carrying a note of desperate hope. Surely this pattern changed as human civilization became more advanced? Modern human society must be more peaceful? Well, we did get more efficient, Vera admitted. Modern human conflicts are much shorter than historical ones, mostly because our weapons got so much better. Why have a 100-year war when you can achieve the same strategic objectives in a few months with modern technology? The hope died in Droll's reptilian features like a candle in a hurricane. But we also got more creative about non-violent conflict resolution, Vera continued. We developed economics, which is basically warfare by other means. We invented diplomacy, which is what you do when you want to avoid warfare but still get what you want. We created international law, which is a set of rules about how to conduct warfare more ethically. More ethically? Ambassador Urix's harmonic voice had reached frequencies that were probably causing structural damage to sensitive equipment. Sure, we established conventions about treating prisoners humanely, protecting civilians, avoiding certain types of weapons that cause unnecessary suffering. We're very thoughtful about our violence. She set the sling aside and picked up her warhammer, testing its balance with practiced ease. We even developed sports, which are basically ritualized combat that let us compete without actually killing each other. Most human entertainment involves some form of simulated conflict. Simulated conflict as entertainment, Councillor Keth repeated slowly, as if trying to process a concept that didn't fit into any existing category of civilized behavior. Oh, yeah. We have games that simulate individual combat, squad tactics, large-scale battles, economic warfare, political maneuvering, and strategic resource management. We teach our children these games as educational tools. Vera looked around the room at the assembled council members, all of whom appeared to be experiencing various species-specific forms of psychological distress. We also have literature, films, music, and art that celebrate famous battles, legendary warriors, and military victories. Some of our greatest cultural achievements are inspired by warfare. Dr. Kowalski, Archivist Nex said, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested deep philosophical confusion. Are you telling us that human culture is fundamentally based on conflict? Not based on conflict, Vera corrected. Shaped by conflict. There's a difference. Humans don't fight because we're naturally violent. We fight because we're naturally competitive, and competition drives innovation, and innovation gives us better tools, and better tools make us more effective at everything, including competition. She stood up and began pacing around her improvised arsenal, which had somehow grown to include several additional weapons that she'd constructed during the conversation without anyone noticing. The thing about humans is that we don't just adapt to our environment, we adapt our environment to us. And when other humans try to stop us from adapting our environment to us, we adapt our methods for dealing with other humans. Adapt your methods for dealing with other humans, Security Chief Droll repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Right. So, if someone builds a wall to keep us out, we develop siege engines to knock down the wall. If they build a better wall, we develop better siege engines. If they develop defenses against siege engines, we develop new types of siege engines, or we figure out how to go around the wall or under it or over it. Vera picked up what appeared to be a functional crossbow that she'd somehow constructed from metal rods and synthetic fabric. And the really impressive part is that we do all of this while maintaining complex social structures, economic systems, cultural traditions, and diplomatic relationships. Complex social structures, Councillor Weck said faintly, while engaged in continuous warfare. Well, yeah, warfare requires really sophisticated social organization. You need command structures, supply chains, communication networks, intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and coordination between multiple specialized units operating in different theaters simultaneously. She loaded a bolt into the crossbow with movements that suggested considerable familiarity with the weapon. Modern human military organizations are some of the most complex social structures ever developed. They can coordinate the actions of millions of individuals across multiple continents in real time, while maintaining operational security and adapting to rapidly changing tactical situations. Millions of individuals, Ambassador Urix whispered, his crystalline form cycling through colors that were definitely not occurring in nature. Oh, sure, and that's just the military personnel. Modern warfare involves entire civilian populations. Everyone from farmers producing food, to engineers designing equipment, to scientists developing new technologies, to economists managing resource allocation. Vera aimed the crossbow at a target on the far wall and fired. The bolt struck dead center, with enough force to penetrate several inches into the supposedly impenetrable surface material. We've basically turned our entire civilization into a really sophisticated war machine that happens to also produce art, literature, music, cuisine, and scientific advancement as side effects. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the crossbow bolt vibrating in the wall and what might have been Councillor Keth having a species-specific nervous breakdown. Dr. Kowalski, Archivist next said finally, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was accessing emergency protocols. I believe we need to recalculate our threat assessment of human civilization. Threat assessment? Vera looked genuinely puzzled. Why would you need a threat assessment? We're applying for Galactic Council membership. We want to be friends. Friends, Security Chief Draal repeated, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had just realized that the word might mean something very different to humans than it did to everyone else. Sure, humans are very social. We like making friends. We're just really good at making sure our friends stay friends. She looked around the room at the assembled council members, all of whom were staring at her with expressions that ranged from fascination to terror to what might have been the early stages of species-wide post-traumatic stress disorder. So, she said brightly, ready to move on to the cultural exchange portion of the evaluation. The cultural exchange portion of the evaluation had been postponed indefinitely. What was supposed to be a routine diplomatic assessment had evolved into something resembling an emergency xenobiological conference, with additional council members being summoned from across the station to witness what Archivist Nex was now referring to in his official reports as the human situation. Dr. Vera Kowalski remained blissfully unaware that she had single-handedly triggered the largest diplomatic crisis in Galactic Council history. She sat in her oversized chair, surrounded by an increasingly impressive collection of improvised weapons, cheerfully answering questions about human civilization, while 12 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats struggled to process the implications of everything they'd learned. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Keth began, his compound eyes reflecting light in patterns that suggested he was choosing his words very carefully. Before we proceed with the cultural assessment, the Council would like to clarify some details about human military capabilities. Military capabilities? Vera looked mildly surprised. I thought we were talking about culture and social development. The two appear to be more closely related in human civilization than we initially understood, Security Chief Draal observed, her scaled fingers still gripping her data pad with enough force to leave permanent impressions. Could you tell us about the current state of human military technology? Well, that's not really my area of expertise, Vera replied, picking up her improvised crossbow and making some minor adjustments to the trigger mechanism. I'm a xenobiologist, not a military specialist. I mostly know about the historical development and the basic principles. The basic principles would be sufficient, Ambassador Urix said, his crystalline form cycling through colors that had moved well beyond the visible spectrum into ranges that probably required specialized equipment to detect. Okay, well, the basic principle of human military technology is that if something exists, we've probably figured out how to weaponize it. Vera tested the crossbow's action, which operated with the smooth precision of a professionally manufactured weapon despite being constructed from scrap materials. We weaponized chemistry, physics, biology, psychology, economics, information theory, and orbital mechanics. Orbital mechanics? Councillor Weck asked weakly. Sure. Once we figured out how to get objects into orbit, we immediately started thinking about how to drop them on people. Kinetic bombardment from orbital platforms is incredibly efficient. No explosives required, just gravity and really good targeting systems. She set the crossbow aside and began examining the remaining materials, apparently planning to construct additional weapons while she talked. But that's actually pretty primitive compared to some of our more recent developments. Modern human warfare is mostly about information control and resource denial. Information control, Archivist Nex repeated, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was cross-referencing multiple databases simultaneously. You're referring to psychological warfare? Psychological warfare, electronic warfare, economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, and what we call soft power projection, Vera explained, beginning to weave synthetic fabric into what appeared to be a net. The idea is that you can achieve strategic objectives without direct military confrontation by controlling information flow, economic incentives, and social narratives. Social narratives? Security Chief Draal's voice had taken on the tone of someone who really didn't want to understand what they were hearing but couldn't stop asking questions. Well, yeah. Most conflicts are really about competing ideas about how society should be organized. If you can convince people that your ideas are better than the other person's ideas, you don't have to fight them. They'll adopt your social systems voluntarily. Vera held up the partially completed net, examining the weave pattern with the critical eye of someone evaluating a precision instrument. Humans got really good at this because we spent so much time fighting each other. We learned that winning hearts and minds is often more effective than winning battles. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Keth said slowly, when you say humans learn to win hearts and minds, are you referring to propaganda techniques? Propaganda is such an ugly word, Vera replied, continuing to work on her net. We prefer strategic communication or narrative warfare or cultural influence operations. The goal isn't to deceive people, it's to help them understand why our way of doing things is better for everyone involved. And if they don't agree that your way is better, Ambassador Urix asked, though his harmonic voice suggested he was afraid he already knew the answer. Then we have really excellent conventional military capabilities to fall back on, Vera said cheerfully. But honestly, it rarely comes to that anymore. Humans have gotten very good at finding mutually beneficial solutions to conflicts. She finished the net and set it aside, then picked up several of the chemical compounds and began mixing them in proportions that suggested considerable familiarity with the process. The key insight is that most conflicts are really about resource allocation or territorial disputes or ideological differences. Once you understand what each party actually wants, you can usually find a way for everyone to get most of what they want, without anyone having to die. Mutually beneficial solutions, Councillor Weck said faintly. Through negotiation. Through negotiation backed by the implicit understanding that non-negotiated solutions would be much worse for everyone involved, Vera clarified, creating what appeared to be a small explosive device from the chemical mixture. It's amazing how reasonable people become when they understand the alternatives. The council members exchanged glances that were becoming increasingly frantic. Even Archivist Nex seemed to be having trouble maintaining his usual gaseous composure. Dr. Kowalski, Security Chief Draal said carefully, you mentioned that you're not a military specialist. Could you tell us what human military specialists are like? Oh, they're much more focused than I am, Vera replied, attaching a simple timer mechanism to her improvised explosive. Military specialists spend their entire careers studying specific aspects of warfare: strategy, tactics, logistics, intelligence, weapons development, defensive systems, offensive systems, electronic warfare, psychological operations, special forces techniques. She held up the completed device, which looked disturbingly professional despite being constructed from basic materials in less than 20 minutes. They're also much better at this kind of thing than I am. I'm just working from general principles and basic training that all humans receive in educational programs. All humans receive military training in educational programs? Councillor Keth's voice had risen to a pitch that suggested his species' equivalent of panic. Well, not formal military training, Vera clarified, but we teach strategic thinking, problem-solving under pressure, resource management, team coordination, and basic technical skills as part of standard education. Plus, most human entertainment involves some form of simulated conflict, so everyone gets familiar with tactical concepts through games and sports. She set the explosive aside and began constructing what appeared to be a sophisticated trap mechanism from the remaining materials. The really specialized military training is reserved for people who choose military careers. They learn things like advanced weapons systems, electronic warfare, intelligence gathering, special operations techniques, and strategic planning. Advanced weapons systems, Ambassador Urix whispered, his crystalline structure now cycling through colors that definitely weren't occurring anywhere in known physics. Oh, sure. Humans have developed some really impressive military technology over the past few decades. Directed energy weapons, autonomous combat systems, advanced materials, nanotechnology applications, quantum communication systems, and some really clever applications of artificial intelligence. Vera finished her trap mechanism, which operated with the precision of a Swiss watch and looked like it could probably disable several people simultaneously without causing permanent injury. But the most impressive thing about human military technology isn't the weapons themselves, it's the integration. Everything works together as part of a comprehensive system. Comprehensive system, Security Chief Drall repeated, her voice barely audible. Right. Communications, intelligence, logistics, command and control, weapons systems, defensive systems, and personnel all integrated into a single coordinated network. A modern human military unit can gather intelligence, analyze threats, coordinate responses, and execute operations in real time while maintaining operational security and adapting to changing conditions. She looked around the room at the assembled council members, all of whom appeared to be experiencing various forms of existential crisis. And the really impressive part is that humans can scale this up to coordinate multiple units across multiple theaters of operation simultaneously. Multiple theaters, Archivist next said, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was having trouble processing the concept. Well, yeah. Modern human conflicts typically involve operations on land, sea, air, space, and in cyberspace simultaneously. Plus, economic warfare, diplomatic maneuvering, information operations, and psychological campaigns all coordinated as part of the same overall strategy. Vera picked up her improvised warhammer and gave it a few practice swings, apparently oblivious to the fact that several council members flinched every time she moved. But like I said, this is all theoretical for most humans. The actual military specialists are much more knowledgeable about specific capabilities and limitations. Dr. Kowalski, Councillor Weck said, her voice carrying the tone of someone asking a question they really didn't want answered. How many military specialists does Earth currently maintain? Active duty military personnel? I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I think it's somewhere around 30 million people across all branches and specializations. The silence that followed was so complete that it seemed to have its own gravitational field. 30 million, Councillor Keth said finally. 30 million military specialists. Plus reserves, support personnel, defense contractors, and people in military-adjacent fields like intelligence, logistics, and research and development. Vera added helpfully. If you count everyone involved in the military-industrial complex, it's probably closer to 100 million people. 100 million people, Security Chief Drall whispered. Dedicated to warfare. Dedicated to national defense, Vera corrected, though I suppose the distinction is mostly philosophical. The point is that Earth maintains the capability to defend itself against potential threats. She set the warhammer aside and picked up her improvised spear, testing its balance with movements that suggested considerable familiarity with polearm combat. But honestly, most of our military capability is focused on deterrence rather than active conflict. The goal is to make potential aggressors think twice before starting something they can't finish. Deterrence, Ambassador Urix said, his harmonic voice barely registering on audible frequencies. Sure. If everyone knows that attacking you would result in unacceptable losses for the attacker, then rational actors won't attack you. It's much more efficient than actually having to fight wars. Vera looked around the room with the expression of someone who had just explained something perfectly obvious and was wondering why everyone looked confused. That's actually why Earth is interested in joining the Galactic Council. We'd much rather resolve conflicts through diplomatic means than military ones. Diplomatic means, Councillor Weck repeated slowly. Absolutely. Diplomacy is much more cost-effective than warfare. Plus, it's better for trade relationships, cultural exchange, and long-term stability. She began packing up her improvised weapons with the casual efficiency of someone cleaning up after a successful presentation. Humans learned a long time ago that it's better to have friends than enemies. Friends buy your products, share interesting ideas, and help you solve problems. Enemies just cause expensive complications. Dr. Kowalski, Archivist next said, his gaseous form swirling in patterns that suggested he was accessing emergency diplomatic protocols. I believe the Council needs to discuss your application in closed session. Sure thing, Vera replied, securing her weapons collection in the fabric net she'd constructed earlier. Should I wait outside, or would you prefer to schedule a follow-up meeting? We'll contact you, Security Chief Drall managed, her scaled features reflecting what might have been shell shock. Great! This has been really educational. I hope I was able to answer your questions about human civilization. Vera stood up, shouldering her improvised arsenal with practiced ease. Oh, and if you need any additional information, Earth's diplomatic mission has prepared comprehensive briefing materials about our history, culture, technology, and strategic capabilities. I think you'll find them very informative. She headed toward the exit, pausing at the doorway to look back at the assembled council members. Thanks for your time, everyone. I'm looking forward to working together as partners in galactic civilization. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving 12 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats alone with the smoking remains of their assumptions about intelligent life in the universe. The silence stretched for several minutes before Councillor Keth finally spoke. I think, he said slowly, we need to create an entirely new classification system. New classification system? Ambassador Urix asked, his crystalline form still cycling through impossible colors. For species like humans, we don't have existing categories that adequately describe a cooperative apex predator species with advanced technology and 8 billion individuals. Security Chief Droll looked up from her datapad, where she had been frantically taking notes. What kind of classification are you thinking? I'm not sure, Keth admitted. Something that acknowledges their unique combination of individual fragility, collective lethality, technological sophistication, and apparent genuine interest in peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence, Councillor Weck said, her voice carrying a note of what might have been hysteria. They call it peaceful coexistence. To be fair, Archivist Nex observed, his gaseous form swirling thoughtfully, their definition of peaceful coexistence appears to be functionally accurate. They do seem genuinely interested in diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Diplomatic solutions backed by the most sophisticated military capability we've ever encountered, Security Chief Drall pointed out. Yes, but that's actually quite reasonable from a strategic perspective, Nex replied. Effective diplomacy requires credible alternatives to negotiated settlements. Ambassador Urix's harmonic voice had dropped to frequencies that were probably causing structural resonance in nearby equipment. Are we seriously considering approving their application for council membership? I'm not sure we have a choice, Councillor Keth said quietly. If we reject their application, what message does that send? That the Galactic Council is only open to species that can't defend themselves? And if we approve it, Councillor Weck asked, then we have 8 billion cooperative apex predators as allies instead of potential enemies, Keth replied, which seems preferable from a long-term stability perspective. The council members sat in contemplative silence for several more minutes, each processing the implications of what they had learned in their own species-specific way. Finally, Security Chief Drall cleared her throat. I recommend we approve the application with special provisions. Special provisions? Ambassador Urix asked. Accelerated integration protocols, enhanced communication channels, and immediate assignment to the Council's Conflict Resolution Committee, Drall explained. If humans are as effective at preventing conflicts as they appear to be at winning them, we should put those capabilities to constructive use. Conflict Resolution Committee, Archivist Nex mused. That's actually quite clever. Channel their natural tendencies toward peaceful purposes. Plus, Councillor Weck added thoughtfully, if they're on the Conflict Resolution Committee, they'll be working with us instead of potentially against us. Councillor Keth's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lighting in patterns that suggested he was reaching a decision. All in favor of approving Earth's application for Galactic Council membership with special provisions. The vote was unanimous. Motion carried, Keth announced. Earth is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with immediate assignment to the Conflict Resolution Committee and enhanced diplomatic status. Should we inform Dr. Kowalski of our decision? Ambassador Urix asked. I think, Security Chief Drall said slowly, we should probably inform our respective governments first. They're going to want to update their threat assessment protocols. Threat assessment protocols, Councillor Weck repeated. For our new allies. Better safe than sorry, Drall replied, especially when dealing with cooperative apex predators. Outside the council chamber, Dr. Vera Kowalski was sitting in the station's observation lounge, enjoying a cup of what the replicators assured her was coffee, while reviewing her notes from the evaluation session. She was pleased with how well the meeting had gone and looked forward to beginning Earth's partnership with the Galactic Council. She had no idea that 3 separate species had already begun drafting requests for immediate transfer to star systems as far from Earth as galactically possible.